Hello, welcome to the latest edition of the eCommerce Explored live panel webinar series. We are back, and this time our topic is product. Yes, we're going to be looking at how product can help you build profit, build your sales, improve. We're going to be looking at efficiency, tech stack, huge amounts of different bits and pieces we're going to be covering with today's session. So if you've not come along to one of these before, eCommerce Explored is our webinar series that's all about exploring sometimes very well-known topics in e-commerce, but sometimes very unoften explored topics. And I don't think product gets anywhere near the focus it should. So I'm really pleased we're doing this one today. The eCommerce Explored is a joint project between both eCommerce Tech and the eCommerce Master Plan business. So we come together, the two businesses I own come together to put all of this on for you. And we usually have quite a lot of fun. I can see there's some of you already logged in. So thank you for joining us right from the very, very beginning. It's brilliant to have you here. And we've had great feedback on them so far. So I'm hoping we can live up to those past expectations, which based on the amazing panelists I've got waiting off screen, is going to be pretty straightforward. We love these to be interactive. So you will find somewhere near the video where you're watching me, I think it's over that way, she points in the right direction, there is a chat box. And if you put messages in that chat box, they come straight through to me and the panelists. Sometimes you may be lucky and the panelists will get back to you in the chat box before I have the chance to ask the question on screen. So it's well worth using that comments box. And that comments box, the other thing I would say about it is I really want to ask your questions of our panelists. We have three amazingly experienced people joining us today. So I really want to get your questions to them. But if you leave it until 10 to, 50 minutes past the hour, I'm not going to have time to get your questions answered. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I'd really like to ask this, ask it now, and I will make sure we get it through to the panelists. So ask those questions early, as soon as you think of the question, and I will do my best to get it answered as we go through the session. But of course, I've got plenty of my own questions too. So if you just want to sit and watch, you are more than welcome to do that as well. Okay, let's find out who these panelists are. So joining us today, we will have Seb from Genie, who is, to massively pigeonhole him, our product tech expert. We have James, who is ex-ASOS buyer, who is, again, to massively pigeonhole him, our buying expert. We've got Alison, who is ex-John Lewis, who is, again, to massively pigeonhole, unnecessarily, our marvellous panelist, our merchandising expert. So yeah, we've got buying, we've got merchandising, we've got tech, and we've got me kind of holding up the marketing end of the bargain. Because if you saw my LinkedIn post about this, you'll know I think marketing has had too much of the limelight over the last 20 years. And we really need to now be refocusing on bringing those together. I'm sure this is a topic we're going to get into, but I'm really, really pleased that we've got buying, merchandising, tech, and marketing on the same panel for you. So do get those questions in via comments as we go through this, because we really want to answer your questions and not just mine. And huge thank you to Genie, who are the sponsors of this session as well. So great to have them supporting us too. Okay, we could carry on doing this with just me, but I think we probably ought to get our lovely panelists up as well, because they are the ones with far more knowledge about product than I have. So welcome everybody. We will go round the room in a clockwise direction. So if you could introduce yourself to the group, give us a bit about your experience and what you're currently up to, that would be really awesome. James, can you kick us off, please?
Okay, that is clockwise. Okay, just double checking. So James Barron, as you said, I was ex-ASOS. I worked at ASOS for nearly 14 years, buying director, brands director over that time. Spent 25 years in retail, working for M&S, Arcadia, Moss Bros, and a few others along the way. So very much involved, obviously, bricks and mortar, and obviously moved into online, which is different type of buying, I would suggest. Different requirements in terms of how you buy merchandise and potentially market. So yeah, my background is really buying product, sourcing from not just from own buy experience, product development, also through the branded side as well. So obviously ASOS, I dealt with sometimes 400 brands, from the likes of Nike all the way through to Stradivarius and others along the way.
See, everybody, I told you we had amazing experience on this session. Seb, can you follow that? Please tell us a bit about yourself, your experience, and what you guys get up to at Genie.io.
It is a very tough act to follow, so I'm not going to try. So I founded Genie about 2 years ago. We're building software to help fast-growing merchants get on top of their inventory fast, so in minutes, not months. Mostly looking at insights and kind of bringing together sales and inventory data to help people make better decisions. Any size of business, kind of from about 500,000 in turnover to 20, 30 million. So on the smaller end of things, but fast growing. And I've done a lot of things before this that all sort of seem to touch on retail or on supply chain. So I built out supply chain for a couple of startups, lived in China for a while doing that. Built a procurement company that didn't really go anywhere, and then started my career in consulting, working with mostly CPG on everything supply chain and operations. So very deep on that bit. And yeah, really excited about the tech because we kind of see with our customers how a lot of things they didn't think they could do in the past are suddenly becoming possible through solutions like ours, but also others. And so it's a huge need, but also a big opportunity. And I'm excited to dive into that.
It's great to have you here, Seb. For anyone wondering what CPG is, that's what we used to call FMCG. She says, showing her age, which means the products you see on the shelves in the supermarkets, just to massively oversimplify again. Clearly, that's my role here today, to oversimplify. So that's what CPG is, consumer product goods. Alison, I know you're a big fan of trying to get people away from spreadsheets to do things slightly more cleverly. And as I try and introduce Alison, her tech has gone. She's been having some internet issues. So if anyone's near Alison, can you send your bandwidth towards her, please? Because we would love to get her involved in this discussion. So if and when Alison reappears, it's always exciting on the e-commerce Explore webinars. We will get her to give you guys an intro too, but she is our kind of voice of merchandising as we go through this. But we don't need to wait for Alison to get the discussion going. So, gentlemen, first statement for you. Product optimization is as important as marketing optimization and website optimization. I realize I'm kind of speaking to the converted here. I'm guessing you're both going to say yes. What do you think? Seb, you look like you're laughing at my questions, so you can go first.
Yeah, I very much agree with this. I think what's probably interesting to talk about here, rather than why we agree about this, is why this is more important now than it might have been a couple of years ago. I think for a lot of people moving into e-commerce a number of years ago, cracking the marketing was a really important part, but also a part with great opportunities, particularly because it was quite cheap for a certain time to get eyeballs, to get customers. And so sometimes you could get away with a bad catalog or with bad products, or just generally with not really optimizing what you're stocking, what you're selling when you're merchandising it, and so on and so forth. I think that's shifted a lot, partially because e-commerce itself has grown a lot. It's become more competitive, but I think also partially because consumer expectations have changed. And so my biggest point around here probably is not that marketing doesn't really matter anymore, website doesn't really matter anymore, but that in the relative hierarchy of attention, probably you should be spending a lot more time on product than you think you should upfront. Whatever your baseline is probably too low. That's what we've seen with most brands we work with.
I like that nuance to it, that it's not that the other two have become less important, it's that we can't afford not to optimize product as well. We've now got Alison back. Fingers crossed with the internet working. So Alison, could you please do your intro? Let us all know a little bit more about you and your experience, and then we'll come back to this statement.
Yeah, hi Chloe, can you hear me?
We can hear you, we can see you, you're moving and everything. It's brilliant.
Brilliant, that's great, because I moved locations, which means my family might bust in at any minute, so hopefully not. But I've worked in retail for 20 plus years. I started off in merchandising, which is making sure you get the right stock. For about the last 13 years, I was in John Lewis until January last year when I went freelance. So I've been helping smaller retailers understand their stocks, what stocks they need for their sales, and just generally help advising them on retail questions that they have. So I find when I go and see clients, it's not just stocks. You do have to talk about products, you have to talk about marketing, you have to talk about like the whole shebang, basically, because everything impacts each other. So yeah, that's me.
So Seb was just making the point to my statement that nowadays you can't neglect your marketing or your website optimization, but you've got to put product optimization as front and center. I'm guessing you would agree with that, Alison, from what you just said in your intro.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the people who put customer at the heart of their decisions are the ones who do the best, because everything has got to be around the customer. So the products is about where will your customer buy the products. You've got to optimize your website to make sure your customer journey is good so that they can find your product. And then in turn, you need to make sure you've got the right stock so that, you know, the stock that they want is there, as in your best sellers, you've got them all backed up. So yeah, all of them together is what the customer expects now.
And James, as the buyer, you're kind of like buyers I've known, it's always about just envisaging that customer the entire time. Is that becoming more complicated now we're getting into this stage of the product journey?
I think so. I mean, product optimization for me starts right at the beginning of the buying cycle. So probably, you know, a year before the product even lands on the website or into store. You know, you need to understand, as someone said, the customer you're aiming for. Now, it's got more complex because customers' behavior has changed over the last 10 or 15 years. It's changed a lot in the last few years as well. Obviously, COVID has made some quite significant changes in how people behave, but things like customer segmentation in terms of creating genres around people. In the olden days, you used to have, you know, it was Shelley or David or whoever it might be. You know, nowadays, for someone like ASOS, they may have 7 or 8 different customer types or segments. And then when you go into more detail, you're looking at what they do as a segment. So how do they dress when they go to the airport? How do they dress when they go to the gym? How do they dress when they go on the plane or off the beach? Or, you know, so you therefore have to break it down even further, which again complicates an element of it. But the aim of that is to try and create a balanced range, I guess, a balanced point of view, which hopefully takes the risk out of the purchase that you make before it lands, based on lessons learned and information and design trends, etc. So for me, it starts, you know, a year before the product actually lands. That's where the optimization piece is probably the most critical. It's fine to optimize it once it's on site, but you're then dealing with issues already or problems or opportunities. Well, actually, a lot of the optimization ideally would start a lot earlier.
I've been involved in a lot of conversations about AI, unsurprisingly, this year. And a phrase which keeps coming up every time you talk about AI is, if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. And from what you were saying then, James, it's like, well, if you buy the wrong stock in the first place, everything is harder. So I totally get your point about you need to go right back to understanding the customer, what they want, right at the beginning of the process as that first step of optimization. Seb, you were grinning there. Would you agree, or would you say something else is the first step in product inventory optimization?
I was laughing because I think and actually it's a good segue into the question as well, but we speak to a lot of growing brands who will kind of come to us and say we need to start doing forecasting. And I think Alison would probably agree with this. It's a very valid point. Any brand should have a good idea of their demand and their supply plan, ideally in a couple of different scenarios. And that should be informed, I think, as James said, by the best possible choices you can make about your range. And I kind of know fashion best in this regard in apparel, but whatever it is, it's kind of a good estimate. The problem with garbage in, garbage out is that if you're either a fast growing brand or you work with things that may be harder to quantify accurately, so think capsule drops, think limited editions, think even like, you know, geographical range expansion, right? Anything that basically introduces noise into your data. We kind of very often see people jump onto technology thinking that if you feed it crap data, it will somehow clean through that crap data and give you good reality. And it doesn't. So the only ways you can improve that, and I guess that brings me to this question is, if you have access to some form of outside data like benchmarking, that can help to improve your own data. Otherwise, a lot of it is knowing your range and knowing your customer. And so for me, the first step in optimizing your inventory that I would recommend, I think there's a couple of different ones that fit in that team of like knowing your customer, knowing your range. But I think the first thing anyone should do is actually a very simple ABC analysis of their inventory. You don't need fancy software for this. You don't need, I mean, you can use software like Genie for this. You can use other software for this, right? But I think getting a really good understanding of which products are selling when, how profitable are they, how quickly do they shift, and how many of them do you hold is like the holy grail of any kind of optimization, because you then know whether you're in a good spot today or not. And if you're not, you know what means that you're not in a good spot, and you can start addressing that. And so for me, the beginning of this is not AI. It's not even necessarily cleaning your data. It's not even big purchasing decisions. It's look at what you have today physically in warehouse, in catalog, and understand how it performs. You know, what's great, what's terrible, what do you need to figure out whether it's great or terrible quickly. And that's the starting point. Everything else, I think, follows from that insight.
Like that. Alison, would you agree? Because that's quite, Seb's giving us quite a merchandising answer there. Would you double down on that, or would you go somewhere else?
Yeah, I think everything he said, I'd probably do it in maybe a slight in that process, but maybe a different order. But I first of all actually start with cleaning the data. So first of all, whenever I go in to see anybody, I want to know what's going on. So first of all, it is cleaning the data, because like Seb says, any retailer, for whatever reason, has probably grown, and their data that used to be how they categorized it in the past isn't necessarily how they categorize it now. So I tend to look at a few years and see what's happened in the last few years, just to see where they've been, so that then you can work out where you're going. Because if you don't know where you've been, how do you know where to go? So I definitely, looking at sales versus stock versus profit are the key things to be looking at. And then once I've kind of worked out what's happened, that's when you need to kind of have that open book to say, what are you going to do in the future? So this is where James is talking about that optimization of product. So once you've kind of understood your lessons learned, as we call them, you then kind of work out, okay, this is the lessons learned, so I don't want to do this again. But you can't use the history as it is just to go forward. Otherwise, you're never going to expand or grow. So you have to work out how you use, what data you're going to use, and which things you're just not going to do anymore because it's not worth it. So it is very much an amalgamation of the past to like highlight the future.
Got you. We've had a great comment come in just to confuse it all a little bit more, because I always think with merchandising, you've got so many angles going on that you're trying to bring together when it comes to product. And then Gathari, I hope I've said that right, apologies if I haven't, has put through a question in the comments for us, saying she would add that the seasonal variation of a particular item, in other words, what sells when, which can be a super tricky part of the mix to bring into this. We'll get into that in a bit, but I want to go on to the next one of my statements, which I think builds on this a little bit as well. James was talking about going back to the customer on the previous answer. Seb and Alison were both talking about data. I think it's impossible to actually properly do the full cycle of product optimization without interrogating what the customers think of your product and how they're using your product. So, for example, looking at returns rates, why people are returning, size, fit. We might as well stay in fashion because it's where this is at its most complicated. Is it possible to do this optimization piece without that link in to the customer at all stages? And James, given you've spoken the most about the customer first, do you think we have to have the customer's point of view in all of this?
Not necessarily. Sometimes the customer doesn't know what they want till they see it, and actually that's probably the benefit of fashion and retail. They purchase obviously on impulse, so if they knew what they wanted, you're not selling them a dream and they could buy it already. So, but you need to understand who your customer is, whether that's price, fashionability, how you buy, ranges. We used to have kind of triangles where, you know, you got the core customer and then you got someone who's a bit more experimental and you got something who's a bit more wild. And obviously there's different percentages of those kind of people who will buy into that. And that's just kind of how you start to structure your ranges and the depth behind it and the width. You know, at ASOS we could buy 1,000 products, but they wouldn't all have the same buy behind them. Some might have a few hundred, some might have a few thousand. You know, customers don't know that. That's just a blend. So it's important. I mean, it's important to follow the customer. And I think that was said by Nick Robertson once. If you follow the customer, then ultimately the customer will reward you. So I think that probably plays more out in where does the customer shop and how they shop. So, you know, when they moved on to desktop to start buying the website, you know, now most people use a phone to buy clothing online. So if you haven't got an app today, you're probably not going to have a great as business as if you had an app and a website. You know, now everyone's moved into Snapchat from Instagram or whatever. So you've got to be where the customer is in some respects, in terms of talking about yourself, being understood, but the product has to back it up, because you can't talk about anything which doesn't have a backup or DNA or a purpose behind it. So there's an element of both. Customers want to be surprised, so not always. There's a lot of data in there which is very useful in terms of, you say, returns rate or colour. You know, fashion just change, and because of the lead time, sometimes nowadays, sometimes purchases being made and things have gone out of fashion because the world has changed, and that's how you then have to react to that in terms of how you reshape the ranges, etc., and keep revisiting. So there's, you know, sometimes that time lag doesn't help. You know, we can't make product in 2 weeks. You know, if we could, then we would get it more right than wrong more often, because you're living with live data of that week, and you can say, right, I'm going to place that. But if you're buying it, you know, 26 weeks in advance, in some cases, for some categories, you have to take a bit more of a cautious approach or a more authentic approach or whatever. So, but yes, the customers, you know, if you don't design for a customer, then you probably haven't got a business really.
So I'm going to take that as a yes.
Okay.
You gave us a lot of very good stuff, but I think within that there was a yes. You've definitely got to not entirely base everything on the customer, but you do have to take them into account. Alison, same situation when it comes to the merchandising side of things?
Yeah, well, it has to be tied up with product, obviously. So what was interesting, I've been to some conferences recently, and there was a huge talk about community and building your community through your social channels. And it reminded me very much of when you're, you know, back in the day, you know, having a huge online store, you would have your stores, you would have your, you know, flagship stores, and the staff who worked in there would give you really good indications of what the customer wanted as well. So they'd be feeding back. Sometimes they'd feed back, you know, things that weren't necessarily true because one person had asked for something and then said everybody wanted it. But, you know, which again is where, you know, maybe the customer didn't want that. But or all of them didn't want that. But yeah, I think very much where you'd get the feedback from customers in store and in branch, that was kind of what we were used to. But I think now it's more about social media and building that community. And one of the retailers that I was interviewing, she was saying how she built the her community and sent out trial product to try for trial with the customers, and that's kind of basically then free. She had obviously you wouldn't want to put everybody in there because you want your customers who are going to give you decent feedback. Like James said, not everybody's going to tell you the truth. You do need to work out who are the right people to ask. But yeah, it was interesting that actually the whole retail dynamics hasn't changed per se. It's just how you interact with them, how you communicate with them. That's what's changed.
Now, Seb, I'm going to skip this question for you and jump on to something else, if that's all right. But if you want to add anything, you're more than welcome. Or should we?
I'm very torn about this question anyway. So
okay, cool. We'll save you from being torn. I wanted to get onto this one, which I hold back when it comes to new stuff in our industry, and I wait for the use cases to come through. And AI is one of those places where I've been holding back. And it really strikes me that in the two places where AI is probably having the biggest impact in our industry at the moment, and the biggest positive impact, is when it's taking big sets of data, crunching them to help us find answers. Whether we're talking AI, machine learning, tech in general, etc. I'm happy for us to fluff the AI word here, but it strikes me that things around personalization and things around inventory planning, these are areas where the tech, the AI, can have a huge impact, possibly bigger than any other part of the business, because it enables us to take all those different angles and merge it together. Is that something you find your customers finding beneficial?
So surprisingly, I don't entirely agree with this.
Okay, love it.
I think to draw a distinction, I think in personalization, it makes like the benefits of AI machine learning technology as it is today are really strong, because I think it would, for example, not be possible it wouldn't be possible to create the number of permutations you'd want to have for specific discounting campaigns or personalization of messaging or things like that at the level that you can by triangulating data points on a customer on a range for personalization. I think with inventory planning, there's an element of it that it's really helpful. But I've taken.
No, we've lost Seb for a second there. Oh, have we lost everybody?
Get a more nuanced view by working with, I don't know, dozens of people. I think I froze. Where did I freeze?
No, I'm not sure if we didn't all slightly freeze them for a second. So, Seb, we lost the very end of your answer there. So if you could,
So I think in a nutshell, personalization, I think it's really obvious. I think with inventory planning and management, it's a yes and a no. I think there is a lot of benefit, and I'm not going to like split hairs about what is AI and what is kind of like working with algorithms and what the difference is, right? But I think there's a lot of immediate benefit for almost anybody involved in really any element of a brand if you make crunching data and collaborating on that a lot easier. And I'll maybe give examples to make this less abstract, right? But if a merchandiser or a designer can sync up their work much more easily with the limitations of a supply chain or of finance. So think about lead times for ordering things, think about when you want to be planning out campaigns, think about payment timelines. That's not AI. That's basically improving the access different people have to data, which is all about breaking data silos. And it's about kind of having interfaces where people can collaborate. That is already like extremely impactful on inventory management, because you'd be amazed at how often different people or these different functions are not able to collaborate or work together because one of them is working in one set of tools, like a product information management or a product lifecycle management solution, or spreadsheets or mood boards or wherever you kind of keep things. And another part is working somewhere else, which might be in an ERP system or an accounting system or in a spreadsheet someone maintains. So I think there's a lot you can already get without advanced kind of AI. I think where AI has a hugely positive impact, and I think James sort of hinted at this earlier, is you've got a lot of different data points you need to align to try and make a confident decision, and then to understand in retrospect whether it was a correct decision, to learn from it. So you're talking about how you plan a range, when you order, what you order, how much you order, when you have it shipped, what the lead times are you work with the actual prices that you're able to realize, which kind of customer buys this, whether you get lifetime value out of it. Like, there's a lot of information that you need to be able to align to make decisions. And generally, remembering all these data points is almost impossible for a human being, but B, bringing them together to optimize a decision is actually impossible, just because compute-wise, it's too much to handle. So I think that's where improvements in AI and machine learning are massive, because they make this kind of information easy and accessible for humans to make decisions on. I'm not an advocate of the black box set and forget approach to merchandising and inventory planning. I've seen a lot of people try to do this in some way, shape, or form. In the past, this may have been literally to outsource away all responsibility for stock management to a third party, for example. And you keep burning yourself time and again. If you're an owner of a brand, if you're someone running a range, you will need to get your hands dirty on this a little bit. The bit where technology can really help you is it can be a lot less painful to get your hands dirty on this.
Love it. So use the tech to bring the team together to put the data easily in front of the people, but don't assume that the tech can make all your decisions for you, because that's not going to be a good move.
Yeah, pretty much.
Alison?
Yeah, I agree with Seb in that I was told quite early on in my career that I'd be replaced by a computer. I haven't yet, and I don't think I will. But I've talked. Obviously, Microsoft have called it Copilot, and I think that's what it's about. It's about using the technology to do that large crunching of data, because the job is a lot of variables thrown in together, and that's where the system works best, because it does really good calculations that human brain is not going to be doing, and Excel is not the tool to be doing that kind of thing either. But it has to be with product. Like, product has to be involved in these decisions, and I think that's where it stops short. So it's all AI works really well if you've got a trading company. So if you can buy within your season, you're on a really short lead time, you don't have to plan, like James saying. If you're planning, generally we're looking at now spring summer 25, so if you're planning that far out, it just doesn't work that well by doing it. But if you're buying in season, or you're on a 3-month lead time, you can literally just buy from the supplier very quickly, etc. That's when it works the best. But yeah, when you're working this far in advance, it's not great.
And James, this is the answers from Seb and Alison there are what I would class as the merchandising side of things rather than the buying side of things. I always think of buying as being that bit more creative and more like in the world of content, we're having the where do you use the generative AI? Is there a role for AI in tech, in AI and tech rather, in streamlining and making the buying process more efficient? Or is it there's such a creative element to it that it is going to maintain the very human first piece?
The answer is there must be. The problem is, at the moment, we're a long way off finding that solution. I mean, every company I've worked in, and some of the big partners around the world I've worked with, everyone's got a mishmash of systems. And one of the fundamental problems is you need some form of attribution, which generally is done by a human being. And if you've got 50 attributions, you really want 300, but the 300 are all subjective. The person who sits on this desk to that desk will see it in a different light, which is a buying skill in its sense. But unless you've got your attributions right, as someone said before, the data you put in is crap. Now, I do think the AI has massive opportunities around taking some of the risk of purchase out. If something is not selling, a colour, could it flag up all the colours you've got to come in over the next 12 months? Probably. And actually, that's a conversation. Well, actually, is that a de-risking opportunity? Or the other way around, this is really fast because it's cream or white, or this is shape or whatever. Is there an opportunity to buy more of that? Can we actually add to the orders? But that's the bit I think which needs to work. I mean, we still make clothes as we did 200 years ago, with hundreds of people in factories tapping, sewing away. It's complicated, the threads, there's lots of time and effort put into that. But I think AI can have a huge benefit potentially in things like returns. Why do people return? What can we learn from that? Online, the biggest downfall, if you've got returns rate of 50%, there's more money to be made in terms of profit. Probably 10 times as much profit can be made by reducing returns by 1% than growing your business by 1%. So I think there's things like that where it can do. I'm yet to be convinced, because of the attribution piece and the amount of data you have to build, the technology is not there. You need to be able to take a picture, and the AI should be able to understand lots of variables, which I'm sure over time it can start to do that. Which models work best on site. There must be something in models, and to an extent whereby actually replace models with artificial people, because they're the best type of model, because they've got the best representation and their smile was great, and then et cetera, and the shot. And so I think there's certain things like that where AI could add huge benefit to potentially product optimization. But ultimately, I don't think we're anywhere near there at the moment. And actually buying is a sense, a skill, a sponge, which we haven't yet taught. It can buy generally the safe product, but where does the next product come from? It comes from Portobello Road Market, and someone sees that 18 months before, because they've got, they don't get into that kind of, they don't get that information feed. So for me, there's still a lot to do, but you can scrape, you could scrape TikTok today and probably get quite a lot of very positive messages in terms of what products people are wearing, etc., etc. So I think there's things that can benefit in terms of how you shape your range by having, again, a bit more information to say, well, this is working, or this is now downtrending, right, an up or a down scale, something like that. But I'm yet to see it. And I've had lots of conversations with AI inventors over the last 3 months. And they still don't know what they're looking for, to be honest.
Yeah, there's definitely that thing of find a problem and then try and find the solution. Whereas I think a lot of AI chat is all, we've got a lovely, exciting thing, and now we're gonna try and find something we can ram it into, rather than going problem first. It becomes a solution first. We've had a question come in which builds on what we've just been discussing from Lauren D, and Lauren is asking, if we wanted to look at enhancing our demand planning and product forecasting with AI, Lauren, I'm going to submit tech instead as a substitute for the word AI, just in case, because it might be tech is more of your solution here than AI is your solution. Do the panel have a few recommendations on where we could start to investigate if it's the right fit for us? So Lauren has the hypothesis that enhancing our demand planning and product forecasting with tech and tools would be a good route to go down, but she's not quite sure where to go to make sure it is a good project to be going along, rather than spending a lot of time doing something that's not actually going to help them. Seb, you are our tech specialist, so I'm going to come to you first in this, and then we'll see what Alison and James have to add even.
Could we also revisit the buying process later? Because I think there's one element around the buying process we haven't maybe touched around, which is working together with suppliers, where I think it's actually quite helpful to think a little bit how you can already improve that.
We will go there next.
Just because I think that there's a big element on, James talked a lot about, I guess, developing products and choosing a range. Alison talks a lot about the ways in which you work with a team to refine those forecasts. I think there's several bits that need to work together. It's really helpful to look at them. But in terms of enhancing your demand planning and product forecasting, I guess the first question is probably what the nature of the business is that you have when you start investigating this, and frankly, whether you have quality data for this and whether it is your biggest problem. And as a way to illustrate that, and I'm, by the way, happy to kind of get some, talk through your specific case if you want, Lauren. But if you are a young business selling online only, and you have a couple of months or maybe a year or two track record in which you've been launching new products and selling out, then you're probably still, to a degree, living from supplier order to supplier order in terms of the cash that you have to spend versus the development timeline versus the growth you can achieve. And that's a very different position than if you are a mature business with an online and an offline presence and lots of kind of sales and inventory data passed, or lots of complexity in terms of where you're selling geographically. So I think what would just be my first thing is, like, if where you would start to investigate, I think, is to look back and say, what's the business today, and actually what's the greatest obstacle for us to grow better? Is it that we have, and I can list through a couple of examples that we see a lot with brands, right? Is it that we have essentially too little? Like, we have products that are doing exceptionally well, we keep selling out of them very early. We're not, we leave untapped demand on the table. Or is it you've got a significant amount of dead stock sitting in places because you should be ordering things that work, but actually you've got other things that don't sell, and you've got those. So I think that's kind of the first question, is just like, where are you at with that? I think the second question is, like, what's the nature of your business independent of where you sell in terms of the types of products you have? So complexity can kind of come from a couple of different angles. And I'm pretty sure James and Alison will say that there's a lot more angles to this than there are. But the way we kind of think about it when we meet customers is, you can have a lot of complexity from very few products. And that tends to be the case if your products are highly unique and you're very deeply involved in a manufacturing process. So think about, you're making a beauty product, you're responsible for the formulation, the packaging, the it's got a shelf life. Maybe you're selling it on like a subscription basis, things like that. That is one form of complexity where you have fairly few products, which needs one kind of planning. The other one is you've got a lot of products in a rapidly growing range. And so then you kind of have this complexity that James was mentioning earlier around, you just have a lot of products, long lead times, things to figure out there. So that's the second place I would start, right? The first one is like, what is the main problem I'm trying to address today with forecasting, with demand planning? The second one is like, what is my business? Where is the complexity coming from? And then I think the third one around this is basically what I would call your pain tolerance, which is how much time and budget are you willing to spend on fixing that issue? If you're willing to spend a lot of time and budget, you're able to work with a custom or highly customizable solution or set of solutions that work together and that can optimize the work of your team. If you're growing very rapidly and you probably want to take something that solves a number of big issues for you, maybe leaves a couple of other things for you to fix in a spreadsheet, in Excel, whatever, but that you can get up and running in a few hours, in a few days, not in a couple of months, with kind of like a consultancy coming in. I think those are really, if you can get an idea of that, right? Like, what is my biggest pain in inventory right now? What's the nature of my products? Like, how is this pain going to express itself? And then really, what's my pain tolerance? That helps you kind of narrow down in this huge arena of possible solutions, which go all the way from building your own things in-house, or having like a lot of experts, or hiring a big team, to using very slight enhancements.
Yeah, I think that was kind of like the 101 on problem solving in e-commerce there, not just for demand planning and product forecasting. I love it. Problem first. How much pain can you cope with and what's your budget? Love it. Love that answer. Lauren, I guess that's probably not the answer you were expecting, but it was absolutely spot on. Alison, James, I want to take us on to that buying bit that Seb mentioned earlier and come back to that in a second. So I'm just going to ask if either of you got anything you want to add on top of that answer that Seb just gave in response to Lauren's question. Oh, I've muted Alison, so I'll just unmute Alison so she can answer.
I was going to say I answered Lauren in a message just before Seb started talking, and I think what's really important, what I've seen happen when people have changed systems, is that they've lost some of their ability to do other things. So it's part of the process, they brought in a new system, but then it doesn't give them other things that they were using. One of the key things to focus on is reporting. So it's often not talked about by any tech company who comes in and sells you their lovely, beautiful, dashboards, their lovely pie graphs and all of that. But if you Shopify is terrible for exporting data out and using it to analyze it. And so are quite a few of the others. BigCommerce can't get anything out of it. I mean, they literally keep your data and don't let you have it. So you can't manipulate it. So where Seb says about the black box, that's the problem, because if you're letting a system create your forecast for you, and you can't see how they're doing it, you're trusting a computer with your money, which is obviously a bit scary. So I would say, have a shopping list, work out what it is, what product area do you have? Because if you're fashion versus home, etc., they're going to be very different systems. Whether you're SKU, if you're fashion, you're going to have a lot more SKUs. If you're on home, you'll generally have one SKU. And so they are different systems. Work out what it is that, like Seb says, your pain point. And then make sure you know what's good about your systems as well, because the last thing you need to be doing is put a system in and then lose the good things. So yeah, and that comes back to having a shopping list. So that would be my advice.
I like that. I think that builds on it really well. I want to make sure we got time to explore the buying piece that Seb suggested we talked about, because that was definitely a hot topic and a really good suggestion. So Seb, I'm going to let you kind of ask the question and answer it, if that's all right. And then James, as you're a buying expert, I'll come to you for the follow-up. And then if we've got time, we'll go to Alison as well. Audience, we may have time for a couple more of your questions, so feel free to send some of those through. And if they're particularly awesome questions, I'll just make the panelists answer them instead. So, so do send those through to us. Seb, the buying point you made earlier, bring us back to that and share your suggestions, please.
The easiest way to frame it is probably how we internally look at this. So Genie, the way we look at this is essentially the buying process consists of, at the end of the day, obviously buying and selling merchandise, but there's an element of analyzing whatever data you have today, using that to plan things, and then ultimately order and kind of follow up on these orders. Like those are broadly a number of processes that run together. You can talk a lot about AI, and we did in the analyzing part. You can talk a lot about it in the planning part. I think somewhere people very frequently don't talk about it much is in the actual ordering part. And again, there's elements here that are, to me, pretty obvious around, choosing which supplier to work with in terms of MOQs and lead times and reliability and things like that. But there's also a really big, difficult element around external and internal communication when you're ordering. And I think James talked about this really well. There's a ton of different systems, which means that in practice, everyone falls back on spreadsheets and PDFs and WhatsApp messages that are often linked to significant amounts of value for your company. And so I think one of the areas that we've been looking into, and we haven't built anything there, so it's definitely not in the element of saying we're selling this, but is how you can kind of get that information. I guess how you would almost give somebody who is in a buying function a good personal assistant almost. So seeing the latest information that's coming in various channels, but also like proactively highlighting things that may be issues. Like a really stupid example here, right? But like every single year, brands get caught out by the fact that they order part of their product or components or anything from China, and there's a lot of lackluster communication about Chinese New Year until it's there, and then you get screwed. This is the kind of stuff that you can factor in an awful lot more easily. And so I guess I'll stop it there because then the question is much more interesting, but it's more about the transactional part of buying and following things up until they're actually available. Like, in which ways can technology really improve that? Because I think that's a huge element that no one really likes to do. And it needs to be done, and it's complicated because it changes all the time, and the data's kind of all over the place.
But it makes so much sense that you bring that up, because we talked about, you've got to get the right product in the first place for your target customer. And then we've talked about how you make sure you get the right product selling at the right times by buying it and keeping the levels right. But if, so often problems are caused by stock arriving late, or stock not arriving on time, or stock arriving and it's not right, because that bit you were just talking about has broken down, because we forgot that person needed chasing, or this, or we sent it in the wrong PDF format, or the right code wasn't on that invoice or purchase order, etc. James, you've spent your career dealing with these challenges. Is there solutions on the horizon, or any tips you can share with the audience?
It's a solution. Oh God.
Just a little question for you.
I mean, obviously, a lot of it's about the data. I mean, if you can get the data from a brand or an owned by a supplier, which feeds straight into your system, that therefore takes a huge amount of time out of the creation of an order. At ASOS, as I said, some teams were raising 20,000 orders a year. That was generally quite a manual process for a group of BAs. So ultimately, what the business has been trying to do is find a way of having the data which lives or is available at a brand, because they've used it to create their own products in the first place, and have that electronically sent in the right format into your system, and that fills in 50% to 60% of the spreadsheet. That obviously saves time. One of the biggest problems for suppliers is I haven't got the order yet, but it's due in 6 weeks. And obviously, if you don't get the order quickly, you don't get the trims, you don't get the care label or whatever it is, you start to create problems along the line. So I think there's a lot of work in the process piece, in terms of how you fundamentally set your business up to raise an order and send it out. I mean, the bit Seb talked about before, I think, in terms of supply chain, is you need to understand your supply chain in terms of your demand forecasting. Because if they make in Bangladesh, it takes 6 weeks on a boat. If you make in Turkey, it takes 5 days with 2 people in a truck, or 10 days if you bring one truck. And therefore, the lead time obviously is different. And again, the longer you have to wait to place an order, the bigger risk that product becomes, because you're placing it earlier, product may not have arrived. So yes, there's a massive conversation between how suppliers who make products and retailers who buy product can be cleverer. If the product's really working, why can't it go to the front of a queue and be made ahead of other product? Someone's got to make that call. The supplier can't make that call because they don't know what's selling, but the retailer doesn't make that call either. So how you can optimize that would be to get better product into the business quicker, which generates more cash, which etc. turns faster. And also, as you said before, if a product lands 3 or 4 weeks late, it's potentially lost a third, if not a quarter, of its ideal selling time, which could be a massive difference between a 600 unit buy and actually you've ended up with 1,000 units and you bought 400 more than you wanted because it hasn't landed at the right time. And those kind of efficiency things are also things for people to consider. And there are suppliers who are starting to look at tech to try and get product available quicker. Most buyers have a stock mountain somewhere up their sleeve until they move departments. But no one has that stock mountain on. It's very rare. I've found that actually there's a list of stock which the business owns until you get a call from someone saying, "Well, I've got this here," and no one's doing anything with it. But you probably could have used it. And those are kind of things which were built to make things quicker, but actually, if managed badly, become another headache as well. So the strength of your suppliers is really important. You want as little as possible, strong ones who can pre-order, pre-make their garments, be self-approved. So you take a lot of the processes out. Maybe color swatch, they can approve that as well. You take the processes out. Otherwise, all you're doing is just having to manage every single element. And what you need to do is trust further down the chain. But a supplier has to make money, and retailers take a lot of margin out of suppliers, which doesn't give them the ability to invest. And that's always been one of the problems, which is why people keep moving further and further away. Is they need to invest in technology, but they can't if you want an extra 2% buying discount off them. It doesn't help them build the best tech solutions as well.
It's interesting, isn't it, that point you make about squeezing all the margin out the supplier, because actually if you gave the supplier a little bit more money so they can do a better job, things would arrive on time. So the 1% extra you give them, you can turn into 10% of sales because the product arrived at the right time and it was up to spec.
If everybody used, I don't know, Close 3D, for instance, in terms of design, and you don't have a sample, because there is a question, why do you need a sample apart from potentially marketing? But you don't really need a sample. If you can just take the sample out, you've probably saved yourself a week in terms of production. And, at the moment in the British, we haven't got enough designers trained in Close 3D. They're not taught, they don't understand it, they're still using pencils. We also have to educate and retrain where there is technology available. Because you can see the garment move, you can see it in full render, you can see it close up. It looks exactly as it's going to look like when you put it in your hand. And if you look at online shoppers, they're buying that product already without actually having touched it in the first place. And again, I think there's lots of work retailers can do around that in terms of upscaling technology, training, and getting, and that would cut out huge amount of sampling, far better sustainability, speed to market, fit right first time using avatars, etc., and blocks which are already pre-plugged in. That should take away a lot of the complications that we have.
You've just given us a massive to-do list, James, and I love it. Thank you. Okay. We do not have a lot of time left on this webinar, so we've covered a lot of topics, lots of stuff I wasn't expecting. That's why I'm the marketer in the room and definitely not the expert for this one. I've learned a lot. What I would love the three of you to do as our final question to each of you is to summarize, if you were a brand, a retailer, a founder of a brand watching this, what would your key takeaway be for that person watching? What's the key thing you think they should take away from this to make their e-commerce business more efficient and more profitable in the coming months? Seb, I'm going to come to you first on this one, then we'll come to Alison, and then we'll come to James at the end. So, Seb, what's your kind of your key takeaway for everybody on this?
Actually, I think the whole side discussion we had around, choosing whether tech makes sense is probably a really good one in general, which is if you're trying to approach product and merchandising in a smarter way, it tends to pay off to approach it problem first. I think that's probably there's a lot we can kind of say around that, but I think not jumping into a solution or a change of process or a tip you had somewhere straight away, but actually trying to figure out what's the problem, what's the size of that problem, how badly do you want to solve it. It's probably a really good place to get started. And there's a lot of examples that we talked about here, but the ones that kind of stuck with me was, if you have really high returns rate, fixing that first. I think another one was the one we just talked about just now, which was making sure you launch ranges on time, and then you work with your suppliers to be able to do that. Obviously, another one that is very close to me is around forecasting and planning and kind of making sure you have good data that tells you, the right set of insights for that. But I think whatever it is, it's really, if you're not doing a lot of product today, or if you want to do more product and with the same level of thoughtfulness as you might be doing marketing or, developing your website or any of the other things that you consider key to your business, start from the problems you see today in your business, really understand which ones you want to solve and which ones you don't need to solve, and attack everything from that angle. If you are solution-led in this case, you'll probably end up with a mishmash of solutions that don't really work, and you might actually saddle yourself with a bunch of other problems prematurely that you don't need.
I love it. As I said earlier, good lessons for life there. So thank you, Seb. Alison, what would your final thought be, your key takeaway?
So I suppose it's what was said at the beginning, which is about customer. So it has to start with the customer, it has to end with the customer. So all of the pain problems that you're going to have is probably to do with the customer. So not only is it to think about what your problems are within your company, but it's what is the customer what is as the customer problem for your problem, if you see what I mean. So if your problem is not keeping up in stock, that's your customer's problem, as in because they want to buy it and they can't. So it's always remember what is that problem to your customer.
I like that. Takes a little bit of clocking the brain around it, but I like it. Yeah, because if it's a problem you've got that causes the customer a problem, it's a far bigger issue, going back to Seb's point, than if it's just something that causes you a problem, because that's having less of an impact on sales. Love it. Thank you very much, Alison. James, we've got about 2 minutes for your final thought. Let me unmute you and go for it. What's your final thought, sir?
Mine is product remains king. Okay. Invest in product. Products are best sellers. Product has the lowest realized markdown. Best products have the least returns. You can't sell product if it's not in your warehouse. And if you get great product and you keep to that principle, then you excite the customer.
Love it. Product. Spoken like a true buyer.
Okay.
Brilliant. James, Alison, Seb, thank you so much for all your insights in this session. It's been a real pleasure learning from you. If the audience have learned half as much as I have, then they have got a lot out of this hour. All of you watching, thank you so much for taking part. Thank you for the comments that have been going on and your questions. I hope that's proved useful to you. We may not have specifically said the word profit all that often or sales all that often, but if you take those pieces of advice our panelists have given you, you will find internal efficiencies go up, profits go up, margin improvements happen, and your customers become a lot happier as well. Next time, we will be talking about conversion rates, not just about CRO, A/B testing and all that kind of on-page tweaks. We talk about the whole perspective. So expect some talk about customer and product to be coming up again there. You can sign up for that one right now. We will send you a link to that when you get the replay confirmation from this session. And the replay will be available imminently, like within the next hour, the replay will be there. So if you've watched it and gone, oh my God, my colleague needs to watch this, or one of your friends needs to watch this, please share that link with them because they can log in and watch the replay for free too. And you'll find the contact details of all our lovely speakers somewhere around this video as well. So thank you everyone for being a part of today's eCommerce Explored webinar. That's it for now. See you on the next one. Bye everybody.